Hey everyone, welcome into the February 2023 edition of Carallel's Caregiver Journey Conversation series. Matt Perrin back with you, Director of Caregiver Engagement here at Carallel. And topic today is near and dear to my heart as a former dementia caregiver myself. We're talking about 5 must-use tips for a dementia caregiver. And I'm really thrilled to have Jill Couch joining us today. Jill is just a wealth of knowledge in dementia care. She's an occupational therapist by training. She was the first DAWN method certified care trainer for dementia care. She's also the owner of Better People Care in Fort Collins, Colorado. So, hey Jill, thanks for joining us today.
Hey Matt, thanks so much for letting me join you.
Well, glad you're here. And we don't have a ton of time in these sessions, so we'll get right to it. A little bit of housekeeping. First and foremost, we are Carallel. If you're joining one of these sessions for the first time, a little bit of context. We're a caregiver support company. So we help anyone who's out there in the world just helping a family member, friend, neighbor for any reason. Where Carallel supports you in 2 primary ways. First and foremost, with our caregiver support line, where our team of care advocates provide phone, email, and chat support in a personalized sort of fashion, tailored to your specific situation, your specific needs in a given moment or day. We complement that support with My Care Desk by Carallel, which is our digital platform. It's a one-stop caregiving hub where you can store documents, read articles, watch videos, keep task lists up to date, share information with family, friends, your care team, as it were. So human support by a team of care advocates combined with our digital platform, My Care Desk. We make our service available through health insurance plans across the country, and you can always contact, regardless of what your health insurance plan is, contact our support line via the Caregiver Action Network. So that's a bit about Carallel. Now, on to the good stuff, the session. A little bit of housekeeping. These are conversations by design. It's not a presentation. Jill and I, and hopefully all of you, we're talking about dementia caregiving. It's just a conversation, so please join in. If you have questions, perspectives to share, tips that work for you, please do share in the chat in your GoToWebinar console. So I think, Jill, that's all the housekeeping. Did I miss anything? I don't think so.
Sounds good to me. Nope.
All right, great. So let's get into it. And I want to get a sense of, if I can get my mouse to work, get a sense of the who's joining us today, and what, more specifically, what prompted you to join us today. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll, and if you could just take a quick second and let us know, that'd be great. All right. So Jill, we got over 50% of the vote in. So in the interest of time, I'm gonna, we have 86% or 82% of the folks on the phone today, Jill, are currently caring for a loved one living with dementia, and about 83% and 17% are curious for the future. So welcome to all of you. If you're in the midst of caregiving, so glad you're here. If you're just curious for the future, kudos for being here and taking the time to participate in a conversation like this today. So I'll close that out. So Jill, I thought what we do is let's set a little bit of context, right? And this took me, it's embarrassing to admit how long, but when I was, I spent close to 9 years caring for my mom, Alzheimer's disease, my father-in-law living with Lewy body dementia, and it took me longer than I care to admit to really sort of truly recognize what was actually happening with my mom and my father-in-law, what was happening with their brain, and the brain was changing, right? So can we talk just a little bit for a minute or two about that to set some context? I mean, what's happening when our loved one is experiencing dementia? What's happening in the brain?
Yeah, great question, Matt. It took me a long time to learn the same thing, even as an occupational therapist with a lot of dementia training. And learning the DAWN method, it's the Dementia and Alzheimer's Wellbeing Network. What it taught me is that folks with dementia are losing 3 primary cognitive skills. memory, rational thinking, and attention. But they also keep 3 primary cognitive skills. They keep their intuitive skills, their experiential skills, and mindlessness. And what understanding that dynamic did for me was it helped me understand everything that a person with dementia does and why and how it makes a difference. The other thing I learned is the notion of anosognosia, and it's so important for us to understand in dementia. Anosognosia means the part of the brain that gives us self-awareness into disability isn't working. And so that means that most people with dementia have at least partial anosognosia. So when a loved one with dementia gets indignant at the suggestion of, here, mom, let me get you some help, and we know that their ability to manage their lives is changing, it's not because they're stubborn and it's not because they're in denial. It's because their brain cannot understand that dementia, those cognitive changes, are affecting their ability to manage their life. And that makes a big difference for caregivers, because we go, oh, it's not that mom is being difficult, it's that mom really doesn't understand she has a problem. Even people who say, my memory's terrible, most don't understand what that means to how they're living their lives. And so if they don't understand they have a problem, they don't understand they need help. So we have to set it up differently in a way that they can accept. And that those concepts right there transformed my work as an occupational therapist and dementia specialist.
Well, thank you for that. And it just already learning something, for me anyway, but so the loss of these 3 primary skills or skill areas, let's say, but also the retaining of certain areas and the interplay between the two,
right?
Sort of how that interplay manifests itself is one thing, but also maybe the opportunities that interaction between what's being retained and what's being lost as the brain changes, maybe presents some opportunities for us as caregivers, I would think. And very easy for me now in a conversation like this, as in a retrospective fashion, to sort of sum it up that way. But over time, I think throughout my years of caregiving, I think I was getting there. But one point of clarification as we're going, because there's various forms of dementia, right? And what we're talking about here, for the most part, could apply across the board. Is that correct?
Yes, in fact, dementia is not a disease. Dementia is just an umbrella term that describes those symptoms caused by over 130 diseases and conditions. So your father-in-law had Lewy body disease causing the symptoms of dementia. But what I have seen in the last 5 years of using the DAWN method is it doesn't matter what particular disease is causing the symptoms of dementia. And it also doesn't matter at what stage they are in the dementia process. The tools that I learned with the DAWN method work in every variety of dementia and every stage of dementia. And in essence, the DAWN method is tools to meet the emotional needs of people experiencing dementia. Because with that particular dynamic of changing skill, that's what they can no longer do, is meet their own emotional needs. And when we do, we have a dementia understanding and dementia supportive environment.
Right. So, and that brings us to, it's a good segue to the first tip, which is really, we've already been talking about it. And I'll just caveat all of this by saying I believe these are must-use tips, right? In some way, shape, or form, these were the tips that we'll talk about today are in large part were huge parts of me getting through, in my belief, helping my mom while she was living with dementia live the best possible life she could, right? So general caveat there. But the first tip is actually believing what we've been talking about, right? And it's not that I would read something that is say in a longer form fashion, sort of laying out what we've just been talking about for the last 3 minutes. It's not that I would read that and not believe it, or have someone tell me and not believe it. but I almost think of it as actionable belief, right? So in those moments when I'm interacting with mom, or maybe I'm frustrated with mom or the situation, it's having that belief be so deep seated, and that it's a foundational understanding, and it's informing my actions, right? I guess is
Mhm.
the first tip, right? Is really, and how we all come, every caregiving journey, every caregiving situation is entirely unique and personal. So how we get there is going to vary. But I guess the first tip I put out there is, regardless of how we get there, try as best we can to educate ourselves to really understand and have that be a foundational sort of underpinning to everything we're doing as it relates to caring for our loved one. But just truly believing that these changes are happening in our loved one. What are your thoughts
Right.
there?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a big advocate for giving people experiencing dementia a lot of grace, because number one, they didn't ask to get dementia. Number two, they can't do anything about it. And the reality is, the changes that dementia is causing in their brain, they can't do anything about it. And I see them doing things that is frustrating, irritating, misunderstood, feels like chaos in the caregiving relationship. But when we can understand those changes in the brain, we go, oh, okay, I get it why they're doing this. And it all makes sense. I have a lot of families call and say, oh my gosh, my mom is so OCD now, or my dad is depressed, we need help. And when we start to part out what's really going on, they're not OCD, they're not depressed. It's just that they have these changing cognitive skills, and we have to tweak the environment to support that.
Yeah.
And then they don't look OCD anymore. So,
Right. And not
yeah,
to say though, I totally see where you're coming from there. Not to say that um, somebody might not, somebody living with there may be cases where somebody living with dementia could really have,
of
OCD tendencies,
course.
or truly be, showing signs of depression and things like that. But totally understand where you're coming from, and lived that, right? I can look
Right.
back on certain changes that I was able to make with the help of others, but changes that sort of meaningfully made our life better,
Mhm.
in lots of different ways. But I see a couple of questions coming in. We'll touch on those in a moment, but let's get to the second tip. And maybe some might laugh or chuckle and think, oh man, this is really, really simple. But this was, the second tip is about a mantra, right? And it was a device that helped me in the moment when I was frustrated, discouraged, angry, sad.
Mhm.
But my mantra for me was, it's not mom, it's her dementia. And it was almost like a tool that I used unknowingly, admittedly, unknowingly, to reinforce the belief, reinforce what I was just talking about. Like, mom is changing. She's not the same, through no fault of her own. But this mantra really seemed to help me. And there were times when I would be, I'd give myself a timeout, walk to the other room, or walk outside for a minute. And it was always brief, because we don't have time when we're caregiving. But the mantra seemed to help. I mean,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on something, a simple tip like this?
I agree 100%. Just understanding the reality is dementia is changing the brain of my loved one, and they are going to do things differently. They're still doing the best they can, but it's different. And yes, this is mom with dementia as a factor in her life now. So
Yeah.
just again, to me, it's the grace. It's, you know, when we're tempted to be frustrated because they've done something, going, okay, wait a minute. I encourage people to take a deep breath. Like you say, step away, take a deep
Hmm.
breath and go, whew, if mom could do this correctly, she would. But now because of dementia, she can't.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah, that's exactly right on.
Okay. Well, thank you for that validation. So we do have one of the questions that really strikes a chord with me that I just want to put out there. So we'll get to tip number 3 in a moment. But question from the audience members: as a caregiver, what can I do to get over the total sadness of this? I'm just at the beginning of it. Diagnosed a year ago, but symptoms over three plus years ago. So what would your somewhat brief answer be to a question like that, or a sentiment like that?
First of all, that sadness is real. You know, just be really open and honest. Talk to your loved ones about it. Probably not your loved one with dementia. Get counseling. Big fan of personal counseling for the caregiver. I understand that's another time commitment on top of caregiving. There also are some nice support group type of situations. There's one called Daughterhood that is a support group people can join. Started as caregivers for adult children, caregivers for parents with needs. But I would reach out to some of those kinds of scenarios where you can be with a group who's going through the same process.
Yeah. So, and this is one of the other tips, but talk about it is the first thing that I would say. My heart goes out to the question asker, and I really appreciate the way you put that, Jill. The sadness is real, but talking about it, through all the avenues you were talking about, if you do have access to Carallel, these are things that that our care advocates this is what they talk about. Same with the Caregiver Action Network's Caregiver Help Desk. So in addition to everything that you mentioned, Jill, there are resources. Alzheimer's Association has a support line as well. So keep talking about it is the first thing, but it doesn't leave. In my experience anyway, it's evolved, but it doesn't leave. And I'm just happy you're on this call and happy you asked the question. Okay, so back to the tips. Tip number 3, this was a really difficult one for me to learn, particularly in the stages when my mom was really beginning to have difficulties, and my mom and my father and I having difficulties communicating and articulating, but giving them time and space, right, to participate in the conversation was again, seems like a simple tip, but doing so made just such a meaningful difference in our life together. And it's hard. It's not. It sounds easy to do, but it's not. What are your thoughts on this point, Jill?
You're exactly right, and it also is not easy to do, and it requires a lot of patience. I train my caregivers, and I talk to families about assuming a posture of ponder, meaning sit, and I know this kind of touches on the next tip, but sit, make eye contact. When I'm sitting with one of my companions with dementia, I position myself so that I have my eyes on them all the time. They can look around wherever they want to look, but when they look my way, I'm always looking their way. And it's when we assume that ponder posture, it's like we slow ourselves down, which makes it a little bit easier to give them the time and space they need to share what they want to share, to say what they want to say. I try to give enough time. If you watch that person, you can usually watch their facial expression, let you know that they're thinking of something. There's usually a little flicker. And so I try my best to resist the temptation to say something and instead just sit there and allow them that exactly time and space. And it's a challenge, but if we do that, we can hear some pretty interesting, meaningful things, but we also allow them to preserve their language skills. when
Hmm.
we give them that time and space.
Yeah. So you get to hear from them, but there's also I feel like a dignity aspect to this one, right?
Right.
You're whether they take advantage of the space, whether they're able, I should say, whether they're able to take advantage of the space and actually um, respond or share a thought or communicate non-verbally, whether they do any of that or not, they know they have the space. I believe that, right?
Hmm.
And they appreciate it, and they don't feel trampled or looked past, or that's my maybe that's my own personal bias, but I just in my case, my mother's posture changed when I learned that skill and started implementing it.
Hmm.
Um, so simple tip, hard to execute, but absolutely worth it. Um,
You know,
another.
Matt,
Oh, go ahead, Jill. Go ahead.
real quick, my observation after spending, thousands of hours with people with dementia is they want to remain engaged in the world.
Yeah.
And this time and space is one of the ways that we allow them to remain engaged. So
Mhm.
you're right about preserving really their humanity.
Yeah. So we're slightly off topic, but another question, good question. So what was number three, the third loss at the beginning when you were talking about the three losses that people living with dementia experience? What was number three, Joe? Or what were the
Atten-
three losses?
the three losses are memory skills, rational thinking skills, and attention skills.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Hopefully that helps question asker, and if you need further clarification, we're happy to provide it either in the live
Right.
session or after. Um, okay, so tip number four. This was again, this was maybe the hardest thing for me to learn personally, and probably if I were to sort of stack rank the caregiving skills that I developed over my time caring for my mom and my father-in-law Steve, um, this is probably this probably had the biggest impact. Um, and they're all related, of course, but leaning into their reality.
Mhm.
Um, I had a really difficult time doing that, and this notion that uh, mom she could have been telling me the sky was purple, or it was February and she went to the beach that day and got too much sun, and or that her memory care community was they were short staffed, so they asked her to be on the floor and help other residents. My mom was a registered nurse for 40 plus years. Yeah, I just really had a difficult time with it, and it led us nowhere good, because my immediate reaction was, no, you didn't. Mom, that's not true. It's February. You didn't go to the beach. Or, no, you haven't been practicing nurse for 20 years. But it would lead us nowhere good, right?
Mhm.
And it was really difficult for me to learn to lean into that reality, so long as it was safe for her and for others. But it just, because it was so just counter to what I knew to be logic. But the fact
Right.
of the matter is, it was real to her.
Right.
And
Right.
the difference, once I was able to do that, and again, very difficult, was just so, um, it was game changing. So, what are your thoughts there?
Well, that you talking about your logical response, that is a rational skill to be able to respond with logic. And yet, that's one of the primary skills they're losing. So, if they're losing rational thinking and logic, and we respond with rational thinking and logic, we are contradicting their diminishing skills. So, you're right, it's never going to work. So, one of the ways that our caregivers and we train our families to relax into the reality of your loved one with dementia, because their reality is 100% real, is we use the power of the response of, huh, and I match their emotion. So if they're sharing something and they're pretty expressive about it, I go, huh, And if they're sharing, like one of our friends would say, what the heck happened to my brain? I'd go, huh. And that response is empathic, communicates, I'm here with you, I've heard you, and it works beautifully because it doesn't have that rational, logical response.
Yeah.
And if we just sit in that and we'll allow ourselves, like you said, to relax into their reality, they end up feeling like they have a companion. And this is
Hmm.
no different than, Matt, if you call me and you say, oh my gosh, I got in a car wreck today and my car's a mess and there's snow everywhere and my daughters need to be picked up from school. You don't want me to try and solve your problem with a rational or a logical response. You want me to go, oh my goodness, Matt, I'm so sorry. What can I do? Tell me everything. Are you okay? Our companions with dementia need and deserve the same kind of response, even though what they're communicating is not rational, doesn't make sense to them, it does.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, and I'm really glad. I learned it sooner, but I'm glad I learned it. Better late than never. Seeing some comments talking about this portion of the conversation, and so I appreciate those that are sharing their perspective. We got a lot of this is exactly what happens, and I respond with that rational response. So I relate. A lot to the comments being
Mhm.
dropped in here. It is difficult in certain cases. Like there were times when and we don't need to belabor it because we're short on time, but you know, when my mom would tell me that she was attacked, or there are more
Mhm.
severe flavors of this that you know, it's not always so simple, I guess is the point. You know, my mom would also at points talk about people stealing from her, me included, right? And these are really challenging things, but I think a lot of what I'm hearing from you, Jill, applies even in those even more difficult situations.
Yeah, it really does.
You
When
know,
somebody tells me they're being stolen from, I go, you're kidding.
yeah,
And then I listen to them and they express their version of reality. And I'm like, what the heck?
yeah,
And, pretty soon they have shared, I have been empathic, and then we're able to move on to something that they enjoy.
yeah, yeah.
And
Um,
none of this is simple.
no,
It took
no,
me a long time and a lot of practice and a lot of time making mistakes with people experiencing dementia for me to really see, you know, that this works.
yeah. And I'm glad you said mistake. I'm glad you used that word.
Oh, yes.
And we're all doing the best we can, I guess, is just another blanket caveat that I would put out. You know, anyone that is in this, I believe anyone that is in this situation is doing, you know, they're doing the best they can. And we are certainly not perfect. And we are gonna, um, you know, we are gonna feel like we make mistakes, and that's okay. Um, and you know, that's not a tip on the list, but that should be a list. Should be a tip on the list. We'll consider it a bonus tip, Jill. But being uh, giving ourselves grace
Yep.
to make those mistakes um, and learn from them. We're at 12:30. We're going to be bold and go over by 2 minutes. One more tip is providing choice
Hmm.
and collaborating instead of mandating.
Hmm.
And I was a mandator, not a collaborator for far too long at the beginning of my caregiving, and I was just not providing choice. You know, I wasn't enrolling mom in her life at the beginning, and I had to learn how to
Hmm.
do that because
Hmm.
she required so much of me, and I had all these other things in my life, work, family, all this stuff. I just wanted to move from one task to the next, to the next, to the next. Um, in doing so, I wasn't considering sort of you know, her wishes, wants, needs in those moments. So collaboration and choice. How about a comment on that, Jill, real quick?
Yeah, even my caregivers and I, when we communicate with our folks and we know we need to get them somewhere, it's always a we. hey, you know what? We need to get out the door, or we're going to head out the door. It's always that we partner with them. And one of the things is we strategically use chatter. So a caregiver says, you know, I'm helping my husband get dressed, and I don't want to be directive. I don't want to say, Joe, you have to do this. So I say, you know, chatter about a good memory, chatter about the beautiful day outside, chatter about something funny the grandkids did. What happens is the person with dementia feels like they've just had a companionable time, and so does the caregiver. It lowers stress for everybody. So that partnership is huge. You're right, and we advocate for giving people choice. We strategically outline those choices so it's not too much for people with dementia. But you're right that the choice and autonomy is critical.
I love the use of the word chatter there, Jill. Okay, so we need to wrap up. We've touched on a couple. I guess one last tip would be talking about it. We've touched on it. Talk about it with whoever you can, family, other family, friends, your physician. That was a huge win for me when I finally told my doctor about my caregiving. That was a really, looking back now, an important milestone for me. Gave me an ally, and it just gave me the feeling that I knew I had them in my corner. But talk about with whomever you're comfortable, talk about it. And the added benefit of that is just by virtue of talking about it, you get a head start on sort of developing your care team, which is also another critical thing. Like, none of us can do this alone. A lot of us are forced to, but you know, we need to be thinking in terms of like, how can we surround ourselves with a team? And that team might just be, you know, a neighbor once a week and your physician, or it could be broader than that. But talking about it is sort of the origin of so much of what we need as caregivers to make it through day to day, but over the long term, when we're caring for a loved one living with dementia.
Just one quick encouragement. If your loved one with dementia wants to talk about their dementia, great, but don't bring it up with them, because that usually ends up not being helpful to their well-being.
I appreciate that tip, Jill. Any other final thoughts as we're wrapping up?
You know, I applaud everybody who has committed to caregiving. Reach out for help, reach out for support, take a deep breath. The DAWN method was transformational for me, but it is an honorable and difficult responsibility. And, you know, just keep hanging in there.
Yeah. Here's to that. Here's to that. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Hope you can join us next month. We'll be meeting again on March 23rd, where we'll be talking about a lack of health equity for caregivers. Another really, really important topic. So hope you can join us then. If you have any questions, perspectives to share, please do after the fact. You can just send an email to your registration email, and would love to hear from you. And thank you for joining us. And I echo Jill's sentiment. Just thank you for being here. And we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Jill, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Okay, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right.